A young billionaire hears a poor girl playing a violin melody in a busy square. It's the same song he used to sing to his missing daughter. When he asks where she learned it, the girl says, "My mom taught me. She said it was my dad's." He is shocked to discover the truth. The heels of Graham Whitmore's Italian shoes echoed through the empty corridor of the Monarch building. It was almost 8 in the evening, and everyone had already gone home. Everyone except him. Graham loosened his tie while he waited for the elevator. In the reflection of the metal doors, he saw the exhaustion on his face. 42 years old, grey hairs at the temples, and dark circles under his eyes that no amount of money could erase. The shareholders' meeting had been particularly tough that day. Numbers, charts, projections. He handled all of that with mastery. People were the problem. They always had been. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, empty, just the way he preferred. Outside, New York City pulsed under the orange-hued sky of early evening. Graham had a driver at his disposal, as always, but something made him wave the car away. "I'll walk a bit, Arthur. You can go." The driver looked surprised, but didn't question him. Nobody questioned Graham Whitmore. The streets were buzzing with life. People heading home from work, tourists taking photos, street vendors closing up their stalls. Graham walked with his hands in the pockets of his $3,000 suit, oblivious to it all. His mind was still in the boardroom, on the numbers that needed improving next quarter, on the decisions he had to make. That was when he decided to cut through a small square between 2 commercial blocks. The place didn't match the city's frantic pace. There were old trees, wooden benches, and a small fountain in the center. At that hour, few people were around, and then he heard it. The first notes made Graham stop in his tracks, as if he'd taken a punch to the stomach. A gentle, delicate melody played on a violin. A melody he knew like the back of his hand. It can't be. His steps became automatic, guided by the sound that pulled him like a magnet. He walked around the fountain and saw, sitting on one of the benches, a little girl no older than 6. She wore a simple dress, a bit too large for her size, and her brown hair was tied in a messy braid. In her small hands, a child-sized violin that had clearly seen better days. But the music was perfect. Graham felt the world around him disappear. The melody carried him to another time, another place. A room painted a soft yellow, a crib with star-shaped mobiles, a dark-haired, gentle, smiling woman rocking a baby while he, Graham, played that very same song. How is this possible? The girl ended the piece with a delicate lift of the bow. Only then did she notice she was being observed. Her large brown eyes fixed on Graham with a child's curiosity. "You play beautifully," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. The child smiled, revealing a gap where she was missing a front tooth. "Thank you, sir." Graham felt his hands tremble. He needed to ask. He needed to know. "That song? Where did you learn it?" The girl placed the violin on her lap with the care of someone holding a treasure. "My mum taught me. She said it was my dad's." Something inside Graham broke, an invisible but deep crack, like thin ice under too much weight. His eyes burned, and it took all his strength to keep his composure. "Your dad?" "Yes, but I never met him." She shrugged with the kind of indifference only children can show in the face of great tragedies. "My mom says he left before I was born." Graham took a deep breath. His mind was racing, trying to find a logical, rational explanation. That song couldn't exist. He had composed it for his daughter, for Rebecca. A song that had never been recorded, published, or shared with anyone besides his wife. His wife, now gone. His daughter, now gone. Both lost in the fire that destroyed everything 7 years ago. The girl was watching him, curious about his prolonged silence. Graham noticed the details he'd missed at first glance. The shape of her face, the slightly pointed chin, the small upturned nose. Familiar traits that sent chills down his spine. "What's your mom's name?" he asked, almost whispering. The girl hesitated. "She doesn't like me talking to strangers." Graham felt a pang of guilt. Of course he shouldn't be interrogating a child alone in a park, but he needed to know more. "You're right. I'm sorry for asking." He took a step back, trying to appear less intimidating. "My name is Graham." The girl smiled again. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Graham. I'm Clara." Clara. The name hit Graham like a cold wave. It wasn't his daughter's name, but something about this child, about that music. A cell phone rang. The girl quickly pulled an old device from the pocket of her dress. "Hi, Mom. Yes, I'm at the park. Okay, I'm coming." She hung up and started putting the violin away in a battered case. "I have to go. My mum's waiting at the bus stop." Graham wanted to say something, to stop her, to ask more questions, but he held back. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Clara." "Do you play too?" she asked, standing up. Graham swallowed hard. "I used to, a long time ago." Clara waved goodbye and hurried away, the violin case swinging at her side. Graham watched her until she turned the corner, unable to move. Minutes later, he was still standing in the same spot, feeling the world spin around him. 7 years of emotional isolation, 7 years burying any feeling under layers and layers of work and responsibilities. And it only took a few minutes, a few musical notes, for everything to surface. Graham finally moved, leaving the square with heavy steps. His phone vibrated in his pocket, probably another work emergency, another problem only he could solve. He ignored it. For the first time in years, something more important occupied his thoughts. Something he couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. That song, that girl, Clara. Graham arrived at his penthouse apartment feeling utterly stunned. He waved the butler away with a dismissive gesture and went straight to his office. He poured himself a whiskey, neat, and drank it in one gulp. The notes of that lullaby still echoed in his mind, disturbing and familiar. A melody that should have died with his family. With trembling hands, Graham opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he always kept locked. Inside was a small wooden box he hadn't opened in years. He took a deep breath and lifted the lid. There lay the only things that survived the fire: a partially melted gold wedding ring, a photograph singed around the edges, and a few sheets of handwritten music. The lullaby he had composed for his daughter, the same one he had just heard in the park. Graham didn't sleep that night. He sat in his leather armchair, the wooden box open on the coffee table, and an untouched glass of whiskey beside it. The sheets of musical notation were spread in front of him. By the time dawn's light began streaming through the windows, he'd made up his mind. "Cancel all my appointments today," he said on the phone to his secretary, who couldn't hide the surprise in her voice. In 15 years, Graham Whitmore had never cancelled an entire day of meetings. He took a long shower, chose more casual clothes, jeans and a grey sweater, and left before he could change his mind. In the elevator, his reflection showed a man quite different from the unshakable executive everyone knew. The morning was cool and clear. Graham walked straight to the small square, a route that now felt etched into his memory. He sat on a bench near the fountain and waited, watching every passer-by. His heart sped up each time he saw a child carrying a musical instrument. Hours went by. Noon, 1 o'clock, 2, no sign of the girl. Graham began to think he'd imagined it all, that exhaustion and loneliness had finally caught up to him, or worse, that he'd never see her again. Then he heard the sound of small, hurried footsteps. He turned, and there she was, Clara, carrying her violin and wearing the same dress as the day before. She looked even smaller in the daylight, her brown hair now tied in 2 uneven braids. Graham froze, unsure how to approach the child, but she spared him the dilemma. She saw him, broke into a big smile, and waved. "Hello, Mr. Graham." He was surprised she remembered his name. "Hello, Clara." The girl set down the violin case on the ground, opened it, and began preparing her instrument. Graham noticed a small plastic container in front of the case, obviously for collecting donations. "Do you come to play here every day?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance so as not to frighten her. "Almost every day," she replied, tuning the strings with surprising focus for someone so young, unless it's raining, or I have to help my mom at home. Does your mom know you're here alone? Clara rolled her eyes in that way only children can. I'm not a baby. I know how to walk by myself, and the park is just 2 blocks from home. Graham nodded, not wanting to seem judgmental. Of course. Sorry for asking. The girl smiled again, without any resentment. It's okay. Want to hear a song? I'd love to. Clara positioned the violin on her shoulder, adjusted her chin and closed her eyes. She started playing, not the lullaby this time, but a cheerful melody Graham recognized as a popular folk tune. Her little fingers danced on the strings with impressive skill for someone so young. A few passers-by stopped to watch. A man in a suit dropped some coins in the container. An elderly lady applauded when Clara finished. The girl thanked them with a small bow. Graham felt a lump in his throat. Seeing this small child playing for coins affected him more than he expected. When the other onlookers went on their way, he approached her again. You play very well, Clara. Where did you learn? My mom taught me the first notes. Then Miss Eliza gave me some free lessons because she said I had natural talent. She said the last part proudly. But now Miss Eliza has moved away, so I practice on my own. Graham swallowed hard. Have you had lunch today? Clara shook her head. Not yet, but I'll eat when I get home. I was thinking, he began, feeling strangely nervous. There's a diner on the corner. If your mom wouldn't mind, I could buy you a meal as a thank you for the music. The girl studied him for a moment with a seriousness that seemed out of place on her childish face. My mom says I shouldn't accept anything from strangers. Your mom is right, Graham answered quickly. It was inappropriate of me. I'm sorry. Clara frowned, thinking, but you're not exactly a stranger. You told me your name yesterday, and you seem nice. She considered a few more seconds. If we stay at the diner, where everyone can see, I think it's okay. My mom always says I should trust my instincts. Graham felt a mix of relief and admiration for the little girl's wisdom. That's a great rule. And yes, we'll stay where everyone can see us. Clara carefully stored her violin, collected the few coins in the container. Graham noticed it was no more than $5 or $6, and walked with him to the corner diner. She didn't try to hold his hand, keeping a sensible distance, which Graham found prudent. The diner was simple, with formica counters and spinning stools. A middle-aged waitress greeted them with a warm smile. Graham chose a table near the window, visible from the street. What would you like to eat? He asked the girl. Clara's eyes lit up at the menu. Can I order anything? Of course. A hamburger with fries and a chocolate milkshake, she said without hesitation. Graham smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in a long while. Sounds like an excellent choice. He turned to the waitress. I'll have the same ma, please. While they waited for the food, Clara looked around with childlike curiosity, swinging her legs that barely reached the floor. Do you work nearby, Mr. Graham? Yes. In a big building a few blocks from here. He hesitated. Clara, that lullaby you were playing yesterday, that bedtime song? My dad's song, she completed. Yes, it's very beautiful. The girl's face lit up. It's my favorite. My mom said my dad composed it especially for me before I was born. Graham felt a chill. Does your mom talk a lot about your dad? Clara shrugged. Sometimes, but she gets sad when she talks about him, so I don't ask much. The waitress brought the milkshakes, and Clara immediately started sipping hers, forming a little chocolate mustache above her lip. Graham watched her, trying to reconcile his growing suspicions with the reality before him. How you look like him, Clara said suddenly. Graham almost choked on his drink. Like who? My dad. She spoke naturally, as if commenting on the weather. My mom has a photo of him. You have the same nose. Graham's heart pounded. Before he could respond, the hamburgers arrived, interrupting the moment. Clara dug into hers eagerly, while Graham could barely swallow. This is so good, she exclaimed between bites. We usually only have hamburgers on special occasions. Really? And what are your special occasions? My birthday, Christmas, and when my mom gets paid at the end of the month. Graham tried to keep his voice casual. And what does your mom do? She cleans houses. Sometimes she babysits too. And at night she studies to become a nurse. Sounds like she works really hard. Clara nodded, munching on a fry. Yes, she says one day she'll get a better job, and then we'll live in a bigger apartment, with a room all to myself. She said it without sadness, just stating a fact. But it's okay. I help by playing in the park. Sometimes people give money. On good days, I make $10 or $15. Graham felt his chest tighten. The pride in Clara's voice about the few dollars she made playing the violin. A 6-year-old shouldn't have to worry about money. You really love playing the violin, don't you? The girl's face lit up. It's the best thing in the world. When I play, it's like I'm flying. One day, I'll perform on a real stage with people standing and clapping. She stretched her arms to demonstrate, just like the videos Miss Eliza showed me. The determination in her voice reminded Graham of himself when he was young, before the business empire turned him into someone else. I think you'll make it, he said, surprised by the sincerity of his own words. Clara grinned, showing the gap in her teeth again. My mom says that too. She says I'm special. She's right. They finished eating, and Graham ordered a slice of apple pie to share for dessert. Clara enjoyed it so much that he ordered another slice for her to take home. For your mom, he explained. The girl's eyes went wide. She'll love it. Apple pie is her favorite. When they were done, Graham paid the bill and walked Clara to the diner door. Thanks for lunch, Mr. Graham. It was the best hamburger I've ever had. My pleasure, Clara. He hesitated. Will you be playing tomorrow too? I think so, if it doesn't rain. She looked at the sky as if checking the forecast for the next day. I have to go now. Mum will be home by 4:30 and I need to be there before she arrives. Graham nodded. Sure, take care on your way. I always do. She gave one last smile and hurried off, carefully balancing the violin case in one hand and the pie container in the other. Graham watched until she turned the corner. He stood there for a few minutes, digesting everything that had happened. The resemblance she mentioned, the lullaby only he knew. The perfect timing. She was 6, his daughter would have been 7. It couldn't be a coincidence, but it also couldn't be real. He'd seen the forensic report, the fire, the bodies, the funeral. Graham returned to his apartment with his mind in turmoil. Once inside, he went straight to his private study and opened the wall safe. He pulled out a thick, dusty folder he hadn't touched in years. On the cover, in impersonal black letters, Insurance Claim Report, Whitmore Residence. He sat in his armchair and opened the folder. The photos of the destroyed house still had the power to make his stomach churn. The technical reports of the analyses all indicated the fire started in the baby's room due to an electrical short. The flames spread quickly, consuming everything. His wife, Catherine, and the little Rebecca didn't stand a chance. Graham turned page after page until he found what he was looking for, the coroner's report. He read it with renewed attention, searching for something he might have missed, some detail forgotten in the haze of grief. And then he found it. A sentence he had never noticed before, buried in the technical jargon. The remains of the second body, presumably the child, were significantly more damaged by the fire, making a conclusive identification by visual or dental methods impossible. Confirmation was made solely by location and context. Graham read and reread that line over and over. Solely by location and context. There was no mention of DNA tests, nothing conclusive. He closed his eyes, feeling the world spin around him. It was madness to think his daughter could be alive, completely irrational. But the song, Clara's face, her age. Graham grabbed the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Victor, it's Graham Whitmore. I need a favor. It's personal and absolutely confidential. He paused. Yes, it's urgent. Meet me in an hour. He hung up and looked at the partially burned photo he'd taken from the wooden box. In it, Catherine smiled, holding little Rebecca in her arms. The image was damaged, but the baby's eyes were visible, large, bright and brown, exactly like Clara's. The bar was nearly empty. A discreet spot downtown, frequented mostly by lawyers and executives seeking a break from corporate chaos. Graham arrived first and chose a table in the back, where the chances of being recognized were minimal. Victor Delgado showed up 15 minutes later, punctual as always. Though it had been 3 years since they last worked together, Victor hadn't changed much, still thin with thin-framed glasses and an air of quiet efficiency. The only new thing was the grey at his temples. "Mr. Whitmore," Victor said, extending his hand at Graham, "please, I'm not your boss anymore." They shook hands and sat down. A waiter appeared immediately, and Graham ordered whiskey for both of them. "So," Victor began after the waiter left, "I admit I was surprised by your call. 3 years with no contact, then suddenly an urgent favor." Graham twirled the glass between his fingers, watching the amber liquid. "I need your complete discretion, Victor. What I'm going to ask involves personal matters I want to keep private." "Naturally." Graham took a deep breath. It was the first time he'd share his thoughts about Clara with anyone, and the idea made him feel vulnerable in a way he wasn't used to. "It's about the fire." Victor tensed. As Graham's personal assistant at the time, he had handled all practical matters after the tragedy, from funeral arrangements to dealing with the press. He knew how painful that subject was. "What exactly do you need?" Graham leaned forward. "I want you to review all the files, reports and documents related to the fire, every detail. Specifically, I'm interested in any inconsistencies regarding identification of the bodies." Victor frowned. "That was 7 years ago, Graham. The case was closed." "I know," Graham said more sharply than intended. He lowered his voice. "Just do this for me, Victor. Pay whoever needs to be paid. Use my name if necessary. But keep it discreet." Victor studied Graham's face for a few seconds before nodding. "I need to know why. If I'm going to dig into those archives again, I deserve to know what's driving it." Graham hesitated. It was a fair request, but how could he explain something he barely understood himself? "I met a girl," he finally said. "She's 6. Plays the violin in a square near the office. And she was playing a song I composed, a song that was never published or shared with anyone but Catherine." Graham swallowed hard. "A lullaby I wrote for Rebecca." Victor went pale. "Graham, that's impossible. Crazy. Believe me, I've considered all those possibilities." "What else?" "The age matches." "The look. There are similarities, Victor. And when I revisited the reports last night, I noticed something I'd never seen before. The coroner's report mentioned that the child's body was identified solely by location and context. There was no concrete confirmation." Victor took a sip of his whiskey, processing this information. "You're suggesting your daughter might be alive?" "That she survived the fire. I'm asking you to investigate the possibilities. That's all." A heavy silence fell between them. Graham knew how it sounded. A man denying reality, clinging to an impossible hope after years of unresolved grief. "You knew Catherine," Graham said, breaking the silence. "You know how meticulous she was, how concerned she was about safety. The house had 5 smoke detectors, extinguishers on every floor, an evacuation plan we practiced regularly. Accidents happen, Graham, even to the most careful people. I know. Believe me, I've spent 7 years accepting that. But now," Graham looked directly into Victor's eyes, "I need to be certain. 100% certain." Victor sighed, giving in. "I'll need a few days, maybe a week. Take as long as you need, and Victor," Graham hesitated, "I'd also like you to track down everyone who worked for us back then, especially household employees." "Looking for someone in particular?" "Not yet. I just want to revisit those days, see if there's any connection I'm missing." Victor nodded and finished his whiskey. "I'll start tomorrow. I'll keep you posted, but only by phone or in person. Nothing in writing. Thank you." Graham felt a weight lift from his shoulders just by sharing this burden. It means a lot. 3 days later, Graham opened his apartment door to find Victor holding a thin folder. His expression was grim, making Graham's heart clench. "I found something," Victor said without preamble, stepping inside. Graham led him to his office, closing the door behind them. Victor opened the folder on the desk, revealing copies of documents marked confidential. "I had to call in a few favors at the police department," he explained, "and pay for some info at the hospital archives. And," Victor pointed to a document, "this is the coroner's full report, not the edited version you received. It confirms your suspicion. The body found in the baby's room was so badly damaged that visual identification was impossible." Graham felt his throat go dry. "And the DNA." Here's the strange part. Victor picked up another document. 3 tests were requested, but only one was completed, Catherine's. The other 2 never reached conclusive results. How is that possible? Samples were compromised by the fire fees, apparently, but Victor paused meaningfully. "I spoke to one of the lab techs who worked there at the time. He remembered the case, said it was problematic. When I pressed him, he mentioned there was pressure to close the investigation quickly." Pressure from whom? He didn't know or wouldn't say, but he mentioned someone from the Whitmore family called constantly, demanding answers. Graham frowned. "I never called anyone. I could barely function those days." "Exactly." Victor adjusted his glasses. "So I asked about the list of employees you wanted, cross-referenced the names with current records and found something interesting." He picked up another document. Amelia Morgan, the nanny Catherine hired just a month before the fire. She wasn't at the house that night, it was her night off. And she vanished after the fire. Never came back to collect her belongings or her last paycheck. Graham tried to remember the woman, but her face was just a blur in his memory. "Do you think it means something?" "I don't know, but it's an intriguing coincidence, isn't it? A newly hired nanny disappears right after the fire, without a trace." Graham felt a cold chill run down his spine. "Have you tracked her down?" "Not yet, but I have a few leads. She was an immigrant, which complicates things. Few official records." Graham took out a photo of Clara that he'd discreetly taken with his phone in the park. He showed it to Victor. "This is the girl, Clara." Victor studied the image for a long moment. "She does resemble Catherine," he finally said softly, "especially the eyes." "Yes," Graham whispered. Victor handed the photo back. "Graham, you have to understand the implications of what you're suggesting. If your theory is right, it means someone took your daughter from the house that night, before or during the fire. That wouldn't just be a bureaucratic mistake, it would be kidnapping. Or rescue," Graham countered. "What if someone took her out to save her and never returned her, never informed the authorities? That's a crime, regardless of the initial intent." Graham knew Victor was right, but he couldn't feel anger. Not yet. The possibility that Rebecca might be alive, that Clara might be his daughter, overshadowed everything else. "Keep investigating," he said, putting the photo away. "I want to know everything about Amelia Morgan, and I need more information about that fire. If it wasn't accidental." He let the sentence hang, unable to voice the possibility forming in his mind. Victor nodded, not needing to hear the rest. "I'll find out. But Graham," he added, "keep a clear head. Don't get too close to this girl until we're sure, for her sake and yours." Graham nodded, but he knew it was far too late for that advice. The thought of Clara had already taken root deep in his heart. The seed of doubt now grew into an obsession. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern Graham could never have anticipated in his meticulously organized life. In the mornings, he worked with renewed intensity, packing meetings and major decisions into a few hours. In the afternoons and whenever possible, he found an excuse to leave early. His executives noticed the change but dared not question him. Graham Whitmore rarely explained his actions, and the company continued to thrive under his command. If he now left the office at 3 o'clock a few times a week, there must be a good reason. His destination was always the same, the small square where Clara played her violin. Today he found her sitting on a bench, focused on a school workbook. The violin rested in its case beside her. Graham approached slowly, already familiar with the routine. "Math?" he asked, sitting at a respectful distance. Clara looked up and smiled when she recognized him. Over the past few weeks, their encounters had become more frequent, almost a friendship. "Multiplication," she answered, wrinkling her nose. "It's harder than addition." Graham nodded seriously. "I always found multiplication complicated too." "Liar," Clara exclaimed with a laugh. "Grown-ups know all the tables." "Not true. I still use a calculator for tough problems." Clara appeared to consider this an extraordinary revelation. She closed the workbook and carefully placed it in her worn backpack. "Did you finish your homework?" asked Graham. "I'll finish at home. Now I want to play a bit." She took the violin from its case with her usual care. "I learned a new song." "Want to hear?" Graham felt his chest warm at her excitement. "Of course." Clara positioned the instrument and began to play a simplified version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. A few notes were off, but the melody was recognizable and touching. Graham watched her small fingers move on the strings, the concentration on her face, thinking of all the music lessons Rebecca would have had, of all the school performances he never got to see. When Clara finished, he applauded wholeheartedly. "I'm still learning," she said, blushing slightly. "The middle part is hard." "It was lovely," Graham replied. "Where did you learn it?" "At the local library. There's a lady who gives free music lessons on Saturdays." Clara smiled, proud. "She said I have a good ear." Graham nodded. "She's right." As had become their habit, they walked to the corner diner. The staff there already recognized them. The waitress would smile when they came in and start preparing a chocolate milkshake for Clara, even before she asked. "How was your week at school?" Graham asked, while they waited for their order. Clara began telling him about her teacher, her classmates, and the science project they were working on. She spoke with the same seriousness about the challenges of multiplication, or about the girl who pulled her hair during recess. Graham listened attentively, fascinated by every detail of her life. Sometimes he had to remind himself that he was also here as an investigator, not just a friend. Victor was still searching for Amelia Morgan, but without much luck so far. The records were scarce, and the years had erased many clues. "Mr. Graham?" Clara's voice brought him back to the present. "You look sad." Graham blinked, surprised by the girl's keen perception. "I'm not sad. I'm just thinking." "About sad things," she insisted, gazing at him with those intense brown eyes so reminiscent of Catherine's. "Maybe a little," he admitted. "Sometimes grown-ups think about complicated stuff." Clara nodded as if she fully understood. "My mom makes that face sometimes too, when she thinks I'm not looking." Graham felt a pang of guilt. He never directly asked about Clara's mother, though his curiosity consumed him. Part of him was afraid of what he might discover, that this was the woman who might have taken his daughter. Another part, more rational, knew he needed more proof before any confrontation. "Your mom works a lot, right?" he asked casually. "Yes. She cleans 3 different houses, and at night she studies." Clara took a sip of her milkshake. "But on weekends, we do fun things together. If we have enough money, we go to the movies or a museum." "That sounds great." "It is." Clara hesitated, fiddling with her straw. "Mr. Graham, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why do you like talking to me so much? Adults don't usually talk to kids this much." The question caught him off guard. Graham felt his heart race, unsure how to answer without revealing too much. "I think you're great company," he finally said. "I like hearing you play and talking with you. You're special." Clara smiled, satisfied with that answer. "You're nicer than Uncle Conrad." Graham froze. "Uncle Conrad? He's my mom's brother," Clara explained, not noticing Graham's sudden tension. He doesn't like kids very much. He always complains when he comes over. Graham tried to keep his voice casual. Does he come to your place a lot? No, only when he needs to talk to Mom about grown-up stuff. Clara shrugged. I stay in my room when he visits. He's boring. Graham nodded, processing this information. Conrad was a common name, of course. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. When they finished eating, Graham paid the bill and walked back with Clara only to the entrance of the square, respecting the boundaries set by Clara and her absent mother. Thanks for the snack, mister. Graham, she said, adjusting her backpack and violin case. It was my pleasure. Clara hesitated for a moment, then, in a quick and unexpected gesture, gave Graham a hug. It lasted just a few seconds, enough for him to catch the scent of children's shampoo in her hair, to feel the small warm weight of her body. Before he could respond, she was already stepping away, waving as she ran toward her street corner. Graham stood there, overwhelmed by an emotion he couldn't name, a feeling rising in his throat. The void he had carried for years felt a little smaller, as if Clara was slowly filling in those broken spaces inside him. That night, Graham sat alone in his apartment, staring at the city lights through the window. For the first time in 7 years, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, a future where he wouldn't be alone, a future with a child's laughter echoing through the once empty rooms. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Graham, it was Victor's voice, intense and urgent. I found Amelia Morgan. The address is 347 Maple Street, apartment 2C, Victor said over the phone. An old building in the eastern part of town, low rent, but the neighborhood is decent. She works as a housekeeper for 3 families and studies nursing at night, just like the girl mentioned. Graham gripped the phone, staring at the slip of paper where he'd written the address. Are you sure it's her? Absolutely. Amelia Morgan, 36 years old, hired by your wife a month before the fire. Worked 3 days a week as a nanny. After the fire, she disappeared. Moved to another city for 2 years, then came back with a young daughter. The dates match up, Graham. And the connection to Conrad. Victor hesitated. No concrete evidence yet, just coincidences. But I discovered that, after the fire, a significant amount of money was withdrawn from your brother's personal account. $50,000 in cash. Graham shut his eyes, absorbing the information. Thanks, Victor. I'll handle it now. Graham, Victor said, sounding worried. Do you want me to go with you? This could be complicated. No, I need to do this alone. He ended the call before Victor could argue. For several minutes, he stood still, looking at the address written on the paper. So many questions swirled in his mind, so many contradictory emotions. Anger, hope, fear, guilt. After 7 years believing his family was dead, after 7 years burying his emotions under layers of work and isolation, the possibility that his daughter might be alive left him stunned. He grabbed his car keys and left without telling anyone. The building on Maple Street was exactly as Victor had described, old but well-maintained. There were potted plants by the entrance and colorful curtains in the windows. A modest place, but still preserving a certain dignity. Graham parked across the street and spent nearly half an hour watching the entrance. He saw residents coming and going, an elderly couple, a woman with groceries, a teenager wearing headphones, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Finally, he mustered the courage to cross the street. The lobby was clean with a small hall of mailboxes. There was no intercom or doorman, just a door leading to the stairwell. Graham climbed slowly to the second floor, his heart pounding louder with each step toward apartment 2C. He stopped in front of the door for a long moment. On the other side, he could hear soft music, someone practicing violin. Clara, probably. The tune was simple and sweet, occasionally interrupted when she missed a note and started over. Before he could lose his nerve, Graham knocked on the door. The music stopped abruptly. He heard light footsteps approaching, then the door opened a few inches, held by a security chain. A woman of medium height, brown hair in a simple bun, and cautious eyes peered through the gap. "Yes," she asked, voice controlled. Graham tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Suddenly, he vaguely remembered that face, one of the many household employees who passed through the mansion, a peripheral presence he barely noticed back then. "I'm Graham Whitmore," he managed at last. The woman showed no surprise. Her eyes narrowed slightly and she swallowed before replying, "I know who you are." A tense silence settled between them. Graham noticed her fingers trembling on the chain. "We need to talk," he said, keeping his voice low. "About Clara." Mentioning the girl's name made something shift in the woman's expression, a mix of fear and resignation, as if she'd always known this moment would come. "Mom, who is it?" Clara's little voice sounded in the background. Amelia Morgan took a deep breath and turned her head. "Just someone visiting, honey. Keep practicing your music. I'll talk here in the hallway for a moment." She shut the door, and Graham heard the chain being removed. When the door reopened, Amelia stepped into the hallway, closing it behind her. "How did you find me?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. "Does it matter?" Graham fought the swirl of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "What matters is Clara. She's my daughter, isn't she? She's Rebecca." Amelia closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a physical blow. When she opened them, they held a fierce determination. "Not here," she said. "There's a coffee shop at the end of the street. We can talk there. Shall tell Clara I'm stepping out." Graham nodded, feeling strangely disconnected from his own body, as if observing the scene from the outside, as if none of this were real. 5 minutes later, they were walking side by side down the sidewalk, maintaining a careful distance from each other. Neither spoke until they arrived at the small coffee shop, nearly empty at that hour. They sat at a table in the back. Graham ordered coffee for both of them, more out of habit than desire. "She doesn't know," Amelia said after the waitress left. "Clara doesn't know anything about who she really is, about what happened." "So what happened?" Graham's voice was quiet, controlled, but charged with tension. "Because all I know is that my daughter died in a fire 7 years ago. At least, that's what I was made to believe." Amelia looked at her own hands, clasped tightly on the table. For a few seconds, she seemed to weigh what to say, or whether to say anything at all. I never planned any of this," she began at last. "I was just the nanny, hired a few weeks prior. Your wife, Catherine, was kind to me. The baby, Rebecca, man, was a sweet child, easy to care for." Graham felt a lump in his throat at hearing his wife's and daughter's names spoken so casually after so many years of silence. "That night," Amelia continued, "I wasn't working. It was my night off." She took a deep breath. "I lived in a small apartment a few blocks from your house. It was late, almost midnight, and I was awake studying. I heard a car pull up outside, near the alley. From my window, I saw a man get out in a hurry. He was carrying something in his arms." Amelia paused when the waitress brought their coffees. She waited until the waitress left again. "I thought it was strange. People didn't usually stop in that alley, especially at that time. Then I saw the man place whatever he was carrying on the ground, look around nervously, and run back to the car. He drove off at high speed." Graham listened with growing tension, his body rigid as a violin string. "Something told me I should check. I went down the stairs and headed for the alley. And there," Amelia's eyes welled with tears, "there was a baby, wrapped in a blue blanket with embroidered stars, crying softly." Graham's heart stopped. He recognized that blanket. It had been a gift from his mother when Rebecca was born. "I picked her up," Amelia continued. "She stopped crying immediately, as if she recognized me, and I recognized her. It was Rebecca, the Whitmore's daughter." "And you didn't call the police?" Graham's voice came out harsher than he intended. "You didn't contact me." Amelia shook her head. "I was confused, scared. It was late at night. I was an immigrant on a temporary visa, and I had just found the baby of the family I worked for, abandoned in an alley. I took her home, trying to figure out what was happening. I thought about calling the mansion to see if everything was okay. She took a sip of coffee, her hands still trembling. Before I could decide what to do, I fell asleep holding her. The next morning, I woke up to the news of the fire everywhere. The Whitmore mansion had been destroyed. Your wife and daughter gone. And that's when I realized... Realized what? Graham prompted. The man I'd seen leaving the baby. I had seen him before, at the mansion. It was your brother, Conrad. He visited sometimes. I recognized him. Graham felt the ground vanish under his feet. Conrad? My brother Conrad took my daughter out of the house before the fire. Amelia nodded slowly. I realized something terrible had happened, that somehow Conrad was involved. I was terrified. If I showed up with Rebecca, who would believe me? I was just a newly hired immigrant nanny up against the brother of a powerful man. So you ran, Graham said, his voice filled with accusation. I ran to protect her, Amelia countered, her voice suddenly firm. At that moment, I didn't know what was going on, but my instincts told me the child was in danger. If Conrad had taken her out of the house before the fire, he might have planned the whole thing, Graham finished, the realization crashing down on him like a weight. The fire, Catherine's death, everything. A heavy silence fell between them. Graham felt a growing fury, not just toward Conrad, but also toward Amelia. You could have contacted me later, he finally said, when you realized I wasn't involved, when things calmed down. And then what? Hand over the child I was already raising as my own, to a man I barely knew. Amelia's eyes shone with defiance. Besides, how could I be sure you weren't involved? How could I know who to trust? It was the word of an immigrant against one of the country's most powerful families. Graham ran a hand over his face, trying to process it all. So you renamed her, Clara? Yes. I moved to another city, started over. I raised her the best I could alone. Why did you come back? Graham asked. Why risk returning to the same city, knowing you could run into me? Amelia sighed. The nursing program here is good and offers scholarships. Clara needed a better school, and honestly, part of me thought she deserved to know the truth someday. Maybe. She hesitated. Maybe it was fate. Graham looked out the coffee shop window, watching people pass by, unaware of the drama unfolding within. His mind was a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. For 7 years, he said softly, there wasn't a single day I didn't think about her, that I didn't miss her, that I didn't wonder if I could have done something differently. Amelia watched him in silence, and all that time, my own brother. Graham swallowed hard, unable to finish the sentence. Why? For control of the company? For money? I don't know, Amelia answered. I never really understood, but I do know he left her alive. He could have... She didn't complete the terrible thought. Graham closed his eyes for a moment, letting reality settle in. When he opened them, a new resolve shone there. I need to be sure, he said. A DNA test. Amelia nodded slowly. I know. I expected that. Then what? Graham asked, his voice betraying the turmoil within. What happens after that, Amelia? She straightened her shoulders, both defensive and maternal. Clara is my daughter. I raised her. I cared for her when she was sick, held her hand on her first day of school, taught her to play violin. Every memory she has, every important moment in her life, I was there. Graham felt a stab of pain and envy. All those lost moments, all those firsts he never witnessed. But she's also my daughter, he said, his voice choking with emotion. My blood, the only family I have left. They stared at each other for a long moment, two adults bound by the child they both loved, in different but equally intense ways. I'm not going to take her away from you, Graham finally said. That would only hurt her. But I want to be part of her life. I want to get to know her for real, not just as a stranger who buys her lunch in the park. Amelia studied his face, looking for any sign of deceit or manipulation. After a moment, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Clara will need time," she said. "We'll have to tell her gradually, when she's ready. I can't just say that the man she met in the park is her biological father." "I understand," Graham agreed, feeling both disappointment and relief. "We'll do it your way, at her pace." Silence fell again, but it felt less tense, more contemplative. "You raised her well," Graham finally said. "She's amazing." A small smile touched Amelia's lips, the first since they began talking. "Yes, she is. Smart, talented, kind." Graham's throat tightened. Catherine would have been proud. The mention of Catherine made Amelia's eyes fill with tears. She was a good person. "Kind to me, when many employers weren't." Graham nodded, feeling the weight of losing Catherine all over again. He'd focused so much on losing Rebecca, he might never have truly processed his wife's death. "What about Conrad?" Amelia asked, pulling him back to the present. "What will you do?" Graham's face hardened. "First, I'll confirm that Clara really is Rebecca. Then—" He left the sentence unfinished, but the determination in his eyes said it all. Amelia studied him for a moment. "Whatever you decide, keep Clara out of it. She's been through enough already, even without knowing." "I agree," Graham said. He hesitated before asking his next question. When can I see her again? How do we start this?" Amelia thought it over. Maybe you can come for dinner tomorrow night. As a friend, a first step." Graham felt a knot in his throat. "I'd like that very much." They finished their coffee in silence. As they left, Graham realized that despite the anger he still felt at having been kept from his daughter all these years, he also felt a strange gratitude that Amelia had cared for her, loved her, and protected her when he couldn't. When they parted on the sidewalk outside the building, Graham offered his hand. Amelia hesitated for a moment before shaking it. "See you tomorrow," she said. "See you tomorrow," he replied, watching her re-enter the building. Graham stayed there for a few minutes, looking up at the second-floor windows. Somewhere inside, his daughter was practicing the violin, unaware of the storm gathering around her. A daughter he thought he had lost, a life he thought was over, and a brother whose betrayal he never suspected. For the first time in years, Graham Whitmore cried. Graham stared at the envelope on his desk. Plain white, giving no indication of its life-altering contents. Victor had handed it to him half an hour earlier, without saying a word except "It's done." Nothing more needed to be said. 3 weeks had passed since his confrontation with Amelia. 3 weeks of careful dinners at the small apartment, where Graham slowly gained Clara's trust as a family friend. 3 weeks of watching every gesture, every smile, every expression, searching for signs of Catherine, of himself. 3 weeks waiting for the confirmation now lying in that envelope. With slightly trembling fingers, Graham broke the seal and removed the pages. DNA paternity test report. Numbers, statistics, scientific terms. His eyes scanned them until he found the conclusion. The probability of biological relationship between the male subject, Graham Whitmore, and the minor female subject, Clara Morgan, is 99.9999998%, confirming a father-daughter relationship. Even though he already knew in his heart, seeing it confirmed in black and white made Graham exhale a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Clara was Rebecca, his daughter, his little girl, alive. Silent tears slipped down his face as a storm of emotions overtook him. Overwhelming joy at the miracle of having his daughter back, searing pain for the 7 lost years, and a deep, growing anger at the man who had orchestrated it all. Conrad, his own brother. Graham stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The discreet investigation run by Victor had uncovered more pieces of the puzzle in recent weeks. The $50,000 withdrawal from Conrad's account right after the fire. The phone calls to the lab, pushing for a quick end to the investigation. The large life insurance policy in Graham's name, altered a few weeks before, with Conrad as secondary beneficiary if the primary heir, Rebecca, also died. Everything pointed to a meticulous plan: eliminate Catherine, who had begun questioning certain financial practices in the company, and the baby, leaving Conrad the sole beneficiary if anything happened to Graham. The fire was staged to look like an accident. What Conrad didn't foresee was his own conscience. At the last moment, he couldn't let his niece die. Instead, he abandoned her near Amelia's building, maybe hoping someone would find her, maybe acting without thinking clearly. A moment of reluctant mercy that ultimately saved the girl's life. "Sir," his secretary's voice said over the intercom, "Mr. Conrad Whitmore is here to see you. No appointment." Graham felt his body stiffen. The coincidence was unnerving, as if Conrad sensed that his secret had been uncovered. Or maybe it was just the universe offering an opportunity for confrontation. "Send him in," Graham replied, quickly locking the DNA report in his desk drawer. Conrad entered with his usual confidence, wearing a flawless suit and the easy smile he used in business meetings. At 45, he was just 3 years older than Graham, but the years had been kinder to him. Fewer wrinkles, still dark hair, the look of someone who had never shouldered the weight of grief. "Graham, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. What can I do for you, Conrad?" Graham's voice was neutral, controlled, though his heart pounded hard against his ribs. Conrad seemed to sense something different in his brother's greeting, but he continued, taking a seat without being invited. "I just stopped by to discuss the merger proposal with the Miller Group. The numbers look good, but I think we can push for better terms." He smiled. "Also, it's been a while since we caught up outside of formal meetings. How's life, brother? I've heard you've been stepping out of the office more lately." The familiarity in Conrad's tone, the ease with which he spoke about business as though nothing had happened, made Graham's stomach turn. "I'm fine," he answered curtly. "The merger can wait until Friday's meeting." Conrad raised his eyebrows, surprised by the coldness. "All right, I just thought we could get a head start." He tilted his head, studying Graham. "You seem different. Did something happen?" Graham stared at the man before him, his brother, with whom he'd grown up and shared childhood memories, whom he had trusted all his life. How could Conrad look him in the eye after what he'd done? "Why did you do it?" The question slipped out before he could stop it, low and full of contained emotion. "Do what?" Conrad looked genuinely confused. Graham struggled to maintain composure. "The company. Was it that important? Dad always said I'd take over the presidency, regardless of you being older. Did it eat at you that much?" Conrad's confusion gave way to caution. "What are you talking about, Graham?" "The fire," Graham said, each word heavy as lead. "Catherine, Rebecca." Conrad's face drained of color instantly. For just a second, panic flickered across his features before his expression shut down completely. But it was enough. The clearest confirmation Graham needed. "I don't know what you're talking about," Conrad recovered, but his voice lacked its former confidence. "The fire was a terrible tragedy. You know how much I suffered too, losing Catherine and little Becca." Hearing his daughter's nickname used affectionately by the man who had tried to kill her was too much for Graham. He stood abruptly, hands braced on the desk. "Don't you dare say her name," he hissed, leaning forward. "Not when you left her in a dark alley, wrapped in her blanket after killing my wife." Conrad also stood, now clearly panicked. "You've lost your mind. I won't stand here and listen to these ridiculous accusations." "She's alive," Graham said, throwing down the words like a challenge. "Rebecca is alive. Conrad. The child you abandoned survived." The impact of those words hit Conrad like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, gripping the chair for support. His face now was a mask of pure terror. "That's impossible," he muttered. "You're bluffing." "The DNA test came in today. I have proof of the money you withdrew after the fire, of the calls you made to the forensics lab, of the changes in the insurance policy." Graham spoke with a coldness he didn't know he possessed. "It's over," Conrad. The silence that followed was thick, weighed down by 7 years of lies and betrayal. Conrad looked like he'd aged a decade in mere minutes, his face lined by the burden of exposed truth. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. Graham regarded this man, his brother, his daughter's uncle, his wife's murderer. The hatred he'd felt in recent days still burned like an ember, but there was also something else. Pity. Pity for someone so consumed by envy that he had destroyed everything around him. "I'm going to protect my daughter," he answered simply. "She's suffered enough." "Graham, please." Conrad took a step closer, pleading, "We can settle this between us. It was a terrible mistake. I never—" "Get out," Graham cut him off, his voice dangerously calm. "Get out now, Conrad, before I forget that I once called you brother." Conrad hesitated, as if wanting to say something else, but the unyielding look in Graham's eyes dissuaded him. Without another word, he turned and left the office, shoulders slumped like a man much older. When the door closed, Graham sank into his chair, exhausted. The truth was out now, raw and undeniable. His own brother had destroyed his family out of greed, jealousy, resentment. The pain of that betrayal was almost as deep as the pain of loss he had carried for 7 years. Yet amid the darkness of that revelation shone a radiant truth. Clara Rebecca, his daughter, was alive, growing, learning, playing violin in a small square. Graham picked up the phone and dialed Amelia's number. "The test is positive," he said when she answered. "As we already knew." There was a moment of silence on the other end before Amelia replied, her voice tight with contained emotion. "So? Now what?" "Now we protect Clara," Graham said, gazing at the photo of the little girl on his desk, a discreet snapshot from one of their recent dinners, "and we start building something new together." The truth was confirmed. And as painful as it was, as much as it shattered the foundations of everything he believed, Graham knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. It was time to move forward. For Clara, for Rebecca, for his daughter. 3 days after the confrontation in his office, Graham drove silently through the tree-lined streets of Westview, the exclusive neighborhood where Conrad lived. Ironically, it was Graham's generous loan years ago that had helped his brother buy the place. Next to him on the passenger seat was a leather folder containing carefully organized documents, the results of Victor's investigations, the DNA test, the financial evidence, all meticulously compiled. Graham didn't plan to use all of it today, at least not yet. It was his armor, his safeguard, his reminder of why he was here. Conrad's house appeared at the end of the road, imposing, modern, with large glass windows and a pristine garden. A status symbol, like everything in his life. Graham parked in the circular driveway, ignoring the déjà vu. He had been here for family dinners, holiday parties, corporate celebrations, moments where smiles concealed the secrets now revealed. He took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. This would likely be the last time he set foot in this house. The door was answered not by Conrad, but by Jennifer, his wife. A stylish woman with blonde hair and a practiced smile, whom Graham had always found too distant to be genuine. "Graham?" She seemed genuinely surprised. "Conrad didn't mention you were coming." "He doesn't know," Graham replied simply. "I need to speak with him. It's important." Jennifer hesitated, and Graham saw a flicker of concern cross her face. Conrad must have said something about the confrontation at the office, perhaps an edited version of events. "He's in the study," she finally said, stepping aside. "You know the way." Graham nodded and walked in, refusing the offer of coffee or a drink. He crossed the spacious living room, glancing absently at the family photos on the walls, Conrad and Jennifer with their 2 teenage daughters on exotic beaches, living a carefully curated life. Without knocking, he opened the door to Conrad's study. His brother was seated behind a mahogany desk, dressed in casual clothes, unusual for a man Graham rarely saw without a suit. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes. When he saw Graham, He froze like a cornered animal. "We need to talk," Graham said, closing the door behind him. Conrad straightened in his chair, trying to regain his usual composure. "There's nothing left to say. You accused me of absurd things and I—" "Stop!" Graham cut him off, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm not here to hear more lies." He placed the folder on the desk and took a seat in front of Conrad. They didn't speak for several moments. The ticking of the old clock on the wall was the only sound. "Why?" Graham finally asked, the single word heavy with 7 years of pain. Conrad looked away, focusing on the window overlooking the garden. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious to the drama unfolding within these walls. "You were always the favorite," Conrad said after a long silence, his voice almost a whisper. "With Dad, with teachers, with everyone. Graham the brilliant, Graham the responsible, Graham the natural heir." The bitterness in his words surprised Graham. He had known about some resentment, but never imagined it ran this deep. So it was envy, jealousy. Graham tried to keep his voice controlled. "You killed Catherine and tried to kill an innocent child, your own niece, over some inferiority complex." Conrad finally looked him in the eye, anger and shame mingling there. "It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. The plan was just to scare you, show you that you weren't so perfect, that you couldn't protect your family." "A fire, Conrad." Graham's disbelief was palpable. How could a fire not hurt anyone? "That was the idea of the guy I hired," Conrad said quickly, as if shifting part of the blame might lessen his guilt. "It was supposed to be small, controlled, just a scare. But things got out of hand." Graham felt the blood boil in his veins. "Out of hand? Catherine died in that fire." Conrad's features contorted in a grotesque mix of remorse and self-preservation. "I never wanted that. You have to believe me. When I found out what happened, I was devastated." "But not devastated enough to confess," Graham shot back. "Not devastated enough to tell the truth for 7 years, while you watched me drown in grief, turn into an empty shell." Conrad didn't reply. There was no possible answer. "And Rebecca," Graham pressed, each word meant to cut like a blade. "What were you going to do with her?" His brother swallowed. "I took her out of the house before the fire, on impulse, I guess. I couldn't let a child die. Then you dumped her in a dark alley like garbage." Graham nearly spat the words. "A baby, Conrad, your niece." "I knew that area was busy," Conrad defended himself weakly. "Someone would find her soon, and they did, right? She's alive. By luck, by a miracle, not thanks to you." Conrad lowered his head. When he spoke again, his voice trembled. "What are you going to do? The police, the press?" Graham studied the man before him, the brother he once loved, the uncle of his child, the murderer of his wife. The hatred of recent days still burned in him, but also a grim pity for someone so broken by envy that he wrecked everything around him. "I'm not looking for revenge," Graham said, surprising even himself with the calm in his voice. "I came because you need to know. They declared my daughter dead, but I found her, and now you'll face what you did." "What does that mean?" Graham opened the folder and took out a few sheets of paper. "It's a confession and renunciation agreement. You're going to admit in writing what you did, not to the police, not yet, but to me. And you're going to renounce all your shares in the company and any claim to the family estate." Conrad stared at the documents, torn between shock and relief. "That's all?" "No," Graham went on. "You're also walking away. Completely. From the company, from the family, from me, from Rebecca most of all." "You're banishing me," Conrad said flatly. "I'm giving you a chance you don't deserve," Graham replied, "a chance Catherine never had." Conrad picked up the papers with shaking hands. "And if I refuse?" Graham leaned forward. "Then I go to the police with every piece of evidence I have. I'll go to the press, to our company's clients, to everyone we know. I'll not only destroy you, but also the future of your daughters. I'm prepared to drag the Whitmore name through the mud if I have to." The heavy silence that followed made it clear Conrad knew it wasn't a bluff. He knew his brother well enough to recognize Graham's resolve. "I need to think," Conrad finally said. "No," Graham said, standing. "You decide now. I'm not leaving without an answer." Conrad stared at the documents for a few more seconds, then picked up a pen. With a defeated sigh, he began to sign. Graham watched in silence, feeling not the satisfaction he had expected, but a hollow emptiness. There was no victory here, only the closing of a dark chapter. When Conrad finished, Graham gathered the papers and placed them back in the folder. "I wish I could tell you that someday I might forgive you," he said, meeting his brother's eyes one last time. "But I'm not going to lie to you the way you lied to me all these years." Conrad nodded, defeat etched into every line of his face. "Are you going to tell her, Rebecca?" "Her name is Clara now," Graham said, "and she'll only know what she needs to, when she needs to. As far as she's concerned, you don't exist, Conrad. In truth, you never did." Without waiting for a reply, Graham turned and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused for a moment. "You know what's ironic?" he said, not looking back. "All this for power, money, status. But in the end, the only thing that really matters is something you never valued: family." He left without waiting for an answer, closing the door quietly behind him. As he crossed the living room, he saw Jennifer standing near the stairs, her face a mask of worry and curiosity. Graham merely shook his head slightly, a gesture that conveyed everything and nothing, and continued on his way. Outside, the fresh afternoon air felt lighter, purer. Graham took a deep breath, feeling as though a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He didn't really need Conrad's confession, not anymore. The truth was already in Clara's eyes, in the violin she played, in the melody that could only have come from her father. The truth was in the life he now had a chance to rebuild. The weeks after Graham's confrontation with Conrad were filled with discreet meetings in quiet offices. Graham moved with the same precision and efficiency he showed in the business world, but this time for a purely personal purpose. "I want everything to be legally airtight, but as private as possible," he explained to Dr. Helena Winters, the trusted attorney who had no idea of the magnitude of what she was hearing. Paternity acknowledgement, shared parental rights, a name change Bowen, but without any public exposure. The lawyer nodded, taking notes. "We can handle this administratively, quietly, as requested. Has the child's current mother agreed?" "Yes," Graham replied. "Amelia already signed the initial paperwork." He said nothing about the fire, Conrad, or the 7 missing years. To the outside world, it would just be a father finally acknowledging a daughter born out of wedlock. Common enough not to attract attention, painful enough to discourage questions. While the legal details were handled, Graham and Amelia worked on another equally complex challenge, explaining the situation to Clara. They decided to do it gradually, in small conversations over several weeks, always respecting the girl's emotional pace. "Remember when you told me I looked like your dad?" Graham asked one afternoon, as the three of them strolled through a park. Clara, holding one of each adult's hands and occasionally skipping over cracks in the pavement, nodded absent-mindedly. "Because you have the same nose," she explained, mimicking her music teacher's serious tone. Graham and Amelia exchanged glances over the girl's head. "Clara," Amelia began gently, "what if I told you Mr. Graham really is your dad?" The girl stopped skipping and looked up, first at Amelia, then at Graham, confusion on her little face. "But you said my dad left before I was born." "Sometimes adults make mistakes," Amelia said, kneeling to Clara's eye level. "Sometimes we don't know the whole truth. Graham didn't know about you, honey. He didn't know he had a wonderful daughter. But now I do," Graham added, also kneeling. "And I'm very happy I found you." Clara was silent for a long moment, processing the information the way children do, directly and honestly. "So you're really my dad, not just Mom's friend?" "Yes," Graham confirmed, feeling emotion tighten his throat. "I'm your dad." Clara studied him with those large, bright eyes so much like Catherine's. "Is that why you always buy me ice cream?" Graham couldn't help but smile, That, and because you're a very special girl, more questions would come in the following days and weeks, each more complex. Why didn't he know about her? Why hadn't Mom told him? Were they married? Would he move in with them now? They answered each question with a simplified version of the truth, fit for a 6-year-old, shielding her from the most painful parts of the story. They never mentioned Conrad. They never mentioned the fire. For Clara, the story was simply that her father hadn't known she existed, and now he'd found her. For the time being, that was enough. Are you sure about this, Graham? Amelia asked 3 months after his confrontation with Conrad. They were in her small apartment, sitting at the kitchen table after Clara had gone to bed. It's a lot of change all at once. Graham looked around the cramped but cozy apartment. Over the past months, he'd grown used to the thin walls, the noisy pipes, the too small table for 3. He'd also grown used to coming over almost every night, helping Clara with homework, being part of this simple life he'd never imagined for himself. I'm sure, he replied. The new apartment is perfect. Close to your nursing college, I'm in a good neighborhood, with a great school for Clara, and 3 bedrooms, so we all have our own space. It's very generous, Amelia said, nervously spinning her mug of tea in her hands. But I don't want Clara to grow up thinking she can have anything she wants, just because her dad is rich. Graham smiled. It was one of the things he admired most about Amelia, her determination to raise Clara with solid values despite financial difficulties. It's not about spoiling her, he explained. It's about giving her opportunities. Westridge School has an excellent music program. Imagine what Clara could learn there. Amelia didn't need to imagine. She had already researched that school as soon as Graham mentioned it. The curriculum, the facilities, the quality of education she could never afford alone. All right, she finally agreed, but I'll keep working and contributing to the expenses. And Clara has to keep her responsibilities, her chores, her limits. I wouldn't expect any less from you, Graham said with a smile. 3 weeks later, they helped Clara pack her belongings into cardboard boxes. There weren't many. Clothes, books, a few toys, and of course, her precious violin. The girl was excited about the move, chattering non-stop about her new room and new school. I'm going to make lots of friends, she declared as she carefully placed her books in a box, and I'll study really hard to be the best student. I'm sure you will, Graham said, watching her with a mix of pride and love that still astonished him with its intensity. The next day, a small truck carried their things to the new apartment. It wasn't extravagant by Graham's standards. He could have bought a mansion if he wanted, but it was spacious, bright, and modern, a perfect start to this new phase. Clara ran from room to room, thrilled with the space. When she reached the room that would be hers, she stopped in the doorway, mouth open. Graham and Amelia had decorated it together. Soft yellow walls, floral curtains, a new bed with a blue comforter, and a light wood desk where she could study. But what really caught the girl's attention was the object in the corner, a new violin, properly sized for her, resting on an elegant stand. Is that for me? She asked, almost breathless. So of course, Graham replied. I know you love your current violin, but your new teacher said this one will be more suitable for your lessons. Clara approached the instrument as if it were sacred, gently touching it with her fingertips. Can I play it now? We need to finish unpacking first, Amelia said with a smile. Then you can play all you want. That night, after everything was in its place, Clara took the new violin and positioned it on her shoulder with the confidence of someone who had been doing it for years. She closed her eyes for a moment, as she always did before starting, and then played the first note of the lullaby. The melody floated through the apartment, filling every corner with its sweet, nostalgic notes. Graham and Amelia stood in the doorway, tears in their eyes for different but equally profound reasons. When Clara finished, she looked at them with a radiant smile. It sounds so much better on this violin. It sounded perfect, Graham said, his voice unsteady. Clara set down the instrument and ran to hug him, then stretched her arm to include Amelia too. The three stayed like that for a long moment, an improvised family, bound by extraordinary circumstances and a love that had survived the unimaginable. The first day of school at Westridge arrived quickly. Clara was both nervous and excited, wearing her new uniform, a blue and white pleated skirt, white blouse, and a blazer with the school emblem. Her hair was braided neatly by Amelia, who'd mastered that skill over the years. "What if the other kids don't like me?" Clara asked as Graham drove to the school. "They'll love you," Amelia reassured her from the back seat next to her daughter. "Just be yourself." "What if I can't keep up in class? The teacher said they're already working on double-digit multiplication." "We'll help you with anything you need," Graham promised, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "And remember, I still use a calculator sometimes." That earned a giggle from Clara, easing her tension a bit. The school was impressive, with red brick buildings and a large courtyard where children of all ages gathered before classes. Clara squeezed Graham's and Amelia's hands more tightly as they got out of the car. The academic coordinator greeted them at the entrance, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile. "You must be Clara. We're so excited to have you here. Mr. Daniels, your music teacher, is eager to hear you play violin." Clara's eyes widened. "He already knows I play." "Certainly," the coordinator said. "Your father told us about your talent when he enrolled you." Clara looked at Graham with surprise and gratitude, an expression he would treasure forever. Their goodbye was brief. None of them wanted to drag it out. Clara adjusted her backpack, took a deep breath, and followed the coordinator into the main building, turning around only once to wave. Graham and Amelia stood side by side, watching until the small figure disappeared through the door. "She'll be okay," Amelia said, mostly to herself. "She will," Graham agreed. "Clara's strong, like her mother." Amelia smiled, accepting the compliment without embarrassment. Over the past months, they had developed a new kind of relationship. Not exactly friendship, not exactly partnership, but something unique, built on their shared love for Clara and the mutual respect growing day by day. When they returned home, the apartment felt oddly quiet without Clara's vibrant energy. Graham was supposed to go to the office, and Amelia had nursing classes in the afternoon, but both hesitated to resume their normal routines. "Coffee before we go," Graham suggested. Amelia agreed, and they sat at the kitchen table in comfortable silence. "You know," Graham said after a few moments, "I never truly thanked you." "For what?" "For taking care of her all these years, for loving her the way you did, for being the mother Catherine never got to be." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to thank me for that. She's my life, always has been." "I know," Graham answered gently. "And that's why I'd never try to change that, never try to take your place. I just want to be part of her life too, yours and hers." Amelia nodded, understanding what he left unsaid, that this new family, this new arrangement, worked because all of them wanted it to work. Because the love for Clara outweighed any pride or resentment. When Clara returned from school that afternoon, bursting with stories about her new teacher, new friends, and the music classes starting the following week, Graham and Amelia listened with genuine interest, exchanging looks of contentment above the girl's head. That evening, Clara once again played the lullaby on her new violin, the melody filling every corner of the apartment with its nostalgic sweetness. "This song," she said thoughtfully after finishing, "is special, isn't it? It's not just any song." "No," Graham replied, sitting beside her on the sofa. "I composed it for you before you were born." Clara thought about that for a moment. "So even when you didn't know where I was, I still had a piece of you with me." The simplicity and depth of that observation left Graham speechless. He just hugged his daughter, feeling the warmth of her small body, the beating of her heart, the solid reality of her existence that still felt like a miracle. Amelia joined them on the sofa, completing the perfect circle. Clara's life was only just beginning, now with opportunities, security, and the love of two parents who would do anything to protect her. And at last, After so long, Graham's life was starting anew as well. The alarm rang at 6:30 a.m., as it did every morning. Graham opened his eyes, looked at the familiar ceiling of his bedroom, and smiled. Through the slightly open window, the sun was beginning to rise, promising a bright, pleasant day. He got up with an energy he never thought he'd regain after so many years living like a shadow of himself. The reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a different man. The worry lines were still there, but his eyes had regained their spark, and his expression held a calmness he once thought impossible. In the kitchen, he brewed coffee and packed Clara's lunch with the care of someone still learning. A turkey and cheese sandwich, no crust on as she liked. Apple slices, so she wouldn't hurt her new tooth growing in. Orange juice in the purple thermos, never the blue ones, which was cursed by Clara's hilarious logic. And a little surprise, a hand-drawn note that he knew would make her smile. At 7:00 a.m., he gently knocked on her bedroom door. "Time to get up, sleepyhead," he teased, using the nickname Clara found amusing. A muffled groan emerged from under the comforter. Graham smiled. Mornings were always a small battle. One of the many things he'd learned about his daughter in the past 6 months was that she was definitely not a morning person. "Come on, Clara Belle." He tried another silly nickname. "You have music class today." The comforter moved, and a sleepy face appeared, brown hair sticking out in all directions. "Okay, but I need 5 more minutes." 3, Graham negotiated. 4, Clara countered. "Deal." While Clara got ready, Graham heard Amelia's door open. She came out dressed in her nursing uniform. She was in her final semester and had begun her hospital internship 2 months earlier. "Morning," she said, accepting the mug of coffee he offered. "Is Clara still—" "On the 4-minute phase," Graham finished, and they both laughed. It was one of those small moments of closeness that had become common, an unspoken language between two people who, by circumstance and love for a child, had created a unique bond. "Your shift ends at 4 today?" Graham asked. "Yes," Amelia said, nibbling on a piece of toast. "I can pick Clara up from violin class if you have that investor meeting." Graham shook his head. "I cancelled it. Victor can handle it." Amelia raised her eyebrows, still not entirely used to this new version of Graham Whitmore, the man who delegated responsibilities and rearranged his financial empire around school events and music lessons. "Are you sure? I thought it was important." "Not more important than hearing Clara play Bach for the first time," he said simply. Amelia smiled, one of those smiles that used to be rare but now appeared more often. "She's nervous. She practiced late last night." "I heard," Graham said. "Next time, we need to set a cut-off time before neighbors start complaining." Amelia laughed. Who would have thought the mighty Graham Whitmore would ever worry about neighbors complaining about noise? He shrugged, amused. Who would have thought I'd have a 7-year-old daughter playing the violin at 10 p.m.? Their conversation was cut short by Clara finally emerging from her room, uniform on T2, backpack slung over one shoulder. Her hair, now in a simple braid, still had a few stray wisps that Amelia immediately began to tuck in. "Morning, Princess," Graham said, offering her a glass of juice. "I'm not a princess," Clara protested, rolling her eyes in perfect unison with her grin. "I'm a musician. A musician who needs breakfast for energy," Amelia interrupted, placing a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her. While Clara ate, chattering excitedly about the piece she would play later, Graham watched the scene with a sense of fullness he once believed impossible. This busy kitchen, with dishes in the sink and overlapping conversations, was the opposite of the sepulchral silence that had ruled his life for 7 years, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. The weeks and months established a rhythm for the three of them. Graham, once consumed by work, now scheduled meetings around Clara's school hours. Amelia, once forced to juggle 3 different jobs, now focused solely on her studies and internship, knowing she would be a fully qualified nurse in a few months. It wasn't perfect, of course. They argued about boundaries. Graham tended to overcompensate for lost time by spoiling Clara, while Amelia insisted on discipline and responsibilities. "She doesn't need another tablet in Graham," Amelia said firmly. "The one she has works just fine." "But this one has better sound quality for the music apps," he argued. "That's an unnecessary luxury," she insisted. Clara needs to learn the value of things. Early on, these disagreements ended in tense silences. Over time, they learned to compromise, to find middle ground, to recognize one another's wisdom. There were also tense moments when the past resurfaced unexpectedly. A forgotten photo, an innocent question from Clara about her other mom, as she sometimes referred to Catherine. "What was she like?" Clara asked one night, as Graham tucked her in. The question caught him off guard. "Catherine, she was kind, smart. She loved music too, just like you." "Do you have a picture?" Graham hesitated. "I do. Would you like to see it?" When Clara nodded, he went to his room and returned with a framed photo, one of the few that survived the fire, showing Catherine sitting at a piano, her face lit by a radiant smile. Clara studied it curiously. "She was beautiful," she finally said. "Do you think she would have liked me?" Graham felt the lump return to his throat. "She would have loved you more than anything in the world, Clara, just like I do." Then there was a particularly tense night, 3 months after the move, when Clara had a nightmare and called for Amelia, but Graham got there first. The girl, still half asleep, looked at him in confusion. "I want my mom," she said, turning her face into the pillow. Graham felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. He left quietly, running into Amelia in the hallway. She saw his expression and understood immediately. Later, after Clara was asleep again, Amelia found Graham in the living room, sitting in the dark. "She didn't mean—" "I know," he interrupted softly. "She was confused, scared. It's natural she called for you. You're the only mom she's ever known." Amelia sat next to him. "It doesn't mean she doesn't love you, too." "I know," Graham repeated. Then, after a pause, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm trying to replace Rebecca with Clara, if I'm asking her to be someone she's not." "You're not," Amelia said firmly. "You're getting to know your daughter, Graham. The person she is, not the person you imagined for 7 years. That takes time." He nodded, grateful for her simple wisdom. "For all of us," Amelia added, "we're all learning how to be a family." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Not a conventional family, not the one any of them had planned or expected, but a family nonetheless. At Westridge, Clara blossomed. Her teachers praised not only her musical talent, but also her quick intelligence and kindness toward classmates. She made friends easily, especially in the music group, where her command of the violin stood out despite her young age. "She has a rare gift," her music teacher told them during a parent-teacher meeting. "With proper training, she could pursue a professional career if that's what she wants." Graham attended all these meetings, sitting beside Amelia while the teachers discussed Clara's progress. He took meticulous notes, asked relevant questions, and behaved shy in short, like any dedicated parent, something he had never imagined becoming. At home, the three of them established small traditions. Friday movie nights, with Clara choosing the film and everyone crowding onto the couch with popcorn. Sunday morning pancakes, with Graham gradually improving his once limited cooking skills. And music hour when Clara practiced violin and, more often than not, Graham accompanied her on the piano, an instrument he hadn't played in years but had rediscovered for her sake. There were also homework nights, with Clara at the kitchen table, notebooks spread around, Amelia helping with science, and Graham sweating over math problems that somehow felt more intimidating than any corporate spreadsheet. "It's just multiplication, Dad," Clara would say with exaggerated patience that made him laugh. "Look, this is how you do it." Amelia watched these changes with both joy and caution. For 7 years, it had been just her and Clara against the world. Every penny saved, every overtime shift, every sleepless night nursing fevers or calming nightmares. It forged a bond she feared would fade, but that's not what happened. As Graham integrated into their lives, Clara's love didn't split, it multiplied, and the same thing began to happen with Amelia. It was hard not to admire Graham's devotion, the way he restructured his entire life around Clara, how he learned to braid her hair and handle her moods, how he treated every drawing or musical composition she produced with genuine seriousness. Gradually, the defensive walls Amelia had built began to crumble. It was possible to trust him. It was possible to share. It was possible, perhaps, to build something new and unexpected. The 8 months after Graham first knocked on that door, they celebrated Clara's 7th birthday with a small party at the apartment. Just a few friends from school, some new toys, and a cake that Graham and Amelia baked together the night before, laughing at his clumsy attempts at frosting. At the end of the party, when the other kids had gone home and Clara was playing with her presents, Graham handed Amelia an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," he replied. Inside were documents for a house. Not an apartment, but an actual house with a yard, located in a quiet neighborhood 10 minutes from Clara's school and 15 minutes from the hospital where Amelia now worked. "Graham," she began, unsure what to say. "It's not a gift," he said quickly, knowing her pride. "It's an investment for the 3 of us. A place where Clara can grow up, where you can finish your studies without worrying, where I can be close to you both." "It's a lot," Amelia said, flipping through the documents. "I can't—" "We can work out the financial details later," Graham interrupted. "For now, just ask yourself if you'd like to live there, with Clara." "With me?" An unspoken question hung in the air, one neither was quite ready to frame in words. But the look they shared held possibilities that had seemed unimaginable just months ago. "I'll think about it," Amelia promised. 3 weeks later, they moved into the new house. On a particularly beautiful spring Sunday, almost a year after their first meeting in the park, the 3 of them decided to go on a picnic. Clara insisted on bringing her violin, as she always did on outings. "You never know when inspiration might strike," she said with comical seriousness, echoing her music teacher's words. The park was full of families enjoying the weather. They picked a spot under a large tree, spread out a checkered blanket on the grass, and set out the food they'd brought: sandwiches, fruit, and homemade cookies Clara had helped bake. "This is the best Sunday ever," Clara declared after devouring her second sandwich. "Why?" Amelia asked, tucking a stray lock of hair back into her daughter's braid. Clara shrugged. "Because we're all together, and it's sunny, and I have my violin." The simplicity of her answer made the adults smile. For Clara, happiness was straightforward: being with the people she loved, doing what she enjoyed, feeling the sunshine on her face. After eating, Clara took out her violin and started to play. Not the lullaby this time, but a lively piece she had recently learned. Her fingers danced confidently across the strings, her face a mask of concentration that occasionally broke into a grin when she nailed a tricky section. A few kids nearby stopped playing and drew closer to listen, curious. "You play really well," said a freckle-faced boy around her age, his red hair gleaming in the sunlight. Clara smiled proudly. "Want to try?" She offered him the instrument. "Really? Are you sure?" He looked amazed by her offer. "Of course. Hold it like this. Yeah, now move the bow slowly." Soon, a small circle of children formed around her, each taking a turn trying to produce a few notes under Clara's patient guidance. Some managed decent sounds, others made squeaks that made everyone laugh. Clara didn't mind. She taught each one with equal seriousness, like a tiny teacher. Graham and Amelia watched from a distance, sitting side by side on the picnic blanket. "She's amazing," Graham said, pride evident in his voice. "She always was," Amelia replied with a soft smile. "Even in the hardest times, when I worked double shifts and could barely pay rent, Clara always found reasons to smile, to play, to keep going." "She has your strength," Graham noted, studying Amelia's profile. "Your ability to see the best in situations, to never give up." Without overthinking it, Graham took Amelia's hand, weaving his fingers through hers naturally. It was a gesture that had become increasingly common. Small touches, casual contact, an intimacy that grew slowly, built on trust and mutual respect. "We are a family, Amelia," Graham said, tears threatening as he watched Clara laughing with her new friends. "Thank you for never stopping believing." Amelia squeezed his hand gently, her face lit by a serene smile. "I just followed my heart." They stayed like that, comfortable in their silence, hands intertwined on the checkered blanket, watching as Clara put down the violin to play another song. This time, she chose the lullaby, the same melody that had once brought father and daughter together after fate tore them apart. The music drifted through the spring air, soft and familiar. No longer a song of grief and loss, but of hope and new beginnings. The notes rose and fell, telling a story of separation and reunion, of broken hearts and healing hearts. Clara played with her eyes closed, fully immersed in the music. A gentle breeze ruffled her braid. The sunlight bathed her face in gold, and for a moment, Graham glimpsed both past and future in her, echoes of Catherine, echoes of himself, but mostly the unique person Clara was becoming. When she finished, she opened her eyes and sought out the adults' faces, as she always did. Graham and Amelia applauded, as did the other children. Clara took a small theatrical bow, then ran back to them, leaving the violin propped carefully against its case. "Did you like it?" she asked, flopping down on the blanket between them. "It was lovely," Amelia said, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. "Perfect," Graham added. Clara beamed, satisfied, then jumped up again at the sound of one of her new friends calling her over to play. "Can I go?" she asked, already halfway there. "Of course," Amelia said, "but stay where we can see you." "And take care of your violin," Graham added. Clara nodded and dashed off to join the group of kids organizing some sort of game near the park's small lake. Graham and Amelia watched her go, then turned back to each other. A calmness rested between them now, a silent certainty that despite every obstacle, they had arrived exactly where they were meant to be. Under the open sky, bathed in warm sunlight, the three of them formed an image of wholeness none had ever expected to find. Graham, who once thought he'd lost everything. Amelia, who built an entire life shielding a secret. Clara, who grew up surrounded by a love that came from unexpected places. It wasn't a conventional family. It wasn't a story without scars, but it was real, alive, and thriving. And as Clara's music still resonated in their minds, one certainty settled in their hearts. Love, even when it faces the most unlikely obstacles, always finds its way back home.